Well, welcome to Chapter 8. We're going to be talking today about supporting your ideas. Remember this when you get into speaking: nothing is true unless you support it. All right? Nothing can be accepted unless you prove it. And so you need to support your ideas at all cost when you're in public speaking. So let's talk about what supporting materials are, what they look like. Let's just imagine, as we kind of keep this theme, that we're talking about identity theft, and you want to convince your audience that identity theft is this big crime, but it can be thwarted. Is it enough to just make this assertion and trust that your audience is going to believe you? Well, no, of course it's not. You need to show that your audience. You need to show your audience that this assertion is absolutely true. So how do you show that this is true? Well, you have to back it up. And the one way that I always kind of make this analogy to all my classes is this: whatever your contention is, whatever your main idea, whatever your point is, it's like a table. It's a table with no legs, and it's on the floor. So you need to support your contention. You need to support your topic with legs. You've got to give your ideas legs so that it can stand on its own. And we do this by giving some support materials, whether those be narratives, statistics, examples. There are tons of different things that you can use. You can use a story. Let's talk about narratives. You can talk about how your plan was successful in thwarting identity theft in Chicago. Or maybe you can use statistics on the results that are being reported by police departments in various states that use your plan that you're proposing. Or you can also give examples of how the plans work. But by the time you finish giving your supporting materials, your audience may be right there and willing to accept your contention. So you have to support your contentions. You have to support your ideas. Now, here's some of the main reasons why supporting materials are going to be needed. You need to illustrate your ideas. You also need to clarify the difficult concepts that you are perhaps giving to your audience. You also may need to make your speech more interesting. Maybe it's a very dry topic, and your support material can kind of help make it a little bit more digestible. And you need to help them remember key ideas. Remember, we are a story-driven society, and so we're going to look into what these things help us do. But we need to remember certain things, and that's what support materials do. And sometimes it's really important to define a term so that everybody in the audience understands that term in the way that you intend it. For example, what is meant by the word depression? If I said the word depression right now, what are you thinking of? Well, if you're speaking of depression in a speech, do you mean like a mild case of feeling blue, or do you mean that really serious psychological disorder that can, actually drive some people to commit suicide? What form of depression are you talking about? Sometimes the definition is most effective when you pair it with another type of support material, such as examples, and we'll get to those in a moment. But it's really important to define what you are talking about. What you see here is, number one, a beautiful photo, but it's a vivid image. You can also create vivid images by using words. That's right. You don't have to see it, but you can use words to describe objects, animals, people, places, things, situations. To make a word picture come alive, though, in the minds of your listeners, you have to use specific details, such as the golden glow of the sunset, or the last of blue in the sky, or the soft murmur of water as it laps against the sailboat, and the gentle caressing breeze that gives the first hint of the cool night to come. See, you can also use your words to paint vivid images. Even when your presentation software or PowerPoint may not be available, you can still use your words. So vivid images are great supporting materials. You can also give examples. An example is an instance that illustrates a point, right? You see on the screen here that there are several examples of how we as humans communicate with just our hands, right? We extend our hands for a handshake to signify an agreement, or to say hello, to say goodbye. If you're hitchhiking, you stick out a thumb to request a ride, which, by the way, is illegal in Louisiana now. And let's say you put your thumb and your small finger from your ear to your mouth, and that means call me. Call me. So we have good examples of the way that we use our hands. And you want to use this in your speeches as well. Just give an instance that illustrates a point. Then we have narratives. And now narratives are stories that explain or illustrate your message. In a speech on hot air balloons, the speaker related the story of her trip in a hot air balloon in New Mexico. And let me tell you, narratives are really underrated, especially in public speaking. I want you to think about this. We love stories. We humans are wired to hear and to tell stories. Think about Jesus. One of his main way of teaching in the New Testament was through parables. And what are parables? Stories. Think about this. We love to hear people tell stories. We love stories so much that when we lay down at night and we go to sleep, our bodies tell stories in our brain. We call them dreams. So think about always using narratives to help explain and to support any contentions that you're making. We love stories. You'll catch my attention with a good story, so don't be afraid to use them. You can also use comparison and contrast. You want to explain how an object or a concept is different or the same, and you can use these. Comparison shows how two or more things are alike, and, contrasting shows how they're different. Think about these planets here. A comparison of planets in our solar system shows how they're similar in some ways. For example, they all revolve around the sun, while a contrast shows their differences. For example, some planets are going to be covered in thick layers of gas. So this is excellent supporting material to compare and contrast things. You can also use analogies. This is a special type of comparison. It's going to explain a concept or an object by showing similarities between things that at first glance they seem really different. Now look at this old house. For example, you would not think of a dilapidated house as being similar to a business, but a speaker could say, our company is like an old house that is crumbling and about to collapse. We must stop the decay and then work to rebuild a strong structure. Well, how do analogies differ from ordinary comparisons? Well, ordinary comparisons show similarities between two things of the same category, for example, like two different cars. Analogies show similarities between two things of different categories. Perhaps you could say that punctuation marks work like road signs and traffic signals. So they're going to be from different walks of life in our analogies. So just use those. They're very effective. Testimonies are fantastic. If you're speaking on some form of aviation, which, I'm not an expert at, but if I'm fascinated by, if you could illustrate or support some of your remarks by quoting the words of an expert, such as an airline pilot like this lovely little lady here, this is going to give you credibility. This is bringing in expert testimony into what you're saying, and people are going to understand things better and be willing to accept what your contention is more easily. So, yeah, testimonies are perfect. You can also do things like, when it comes to your testimony of experts, there's two different things you can do. You can quote them verbatim, and that's always a good thing. You can also provide a summary of what they're saying. According to this pilot, they said this, just summarize it. And you can also paraphrase, and that's really just taking it and putting it into your own words. But make sure if you do paraphrase expert testimonies that you make sure you still quote them, give them all their credit that is due. You can also use statistics. Now, statistics are the numerical ways of expressing information. Statistics can be very persuasive in arguments because they have like an aura of objectivity and accuracy to them, but they can also be manipulated. So that's the problem you have to be careful of. People can deliberately manipulate stats, or maybe even just be ignorant of how they're using them, and they're still manipulating them. It's important to use statistics carefully. Use them ethically. Remember, we do things above board here. So everything we do, we want to keep it ethical. So let's look at some popular methods of statistics. The most popular method is the average, and that's what most people are familiar with. So let's say you have a class of 11 students, and you want to know the average grade on the last test. So you add up all the test scores and you divide by the number of students, which is 11. And the results show that 85.6 is the average grade. Actually, the kind of average we have just looked at is called the mean. Now, there are other types of averages. The mode is the number that appears most frequently. In this case, in this list, it's 89. And the median is the number that falls in the middle. In this case, it's actually 86. Now, don't forget, percentages are also good statistics. A percentage is basically just a portion of 100. Let's say that we say 87% of all Americans eat tomatoes. We're saying that if you choose 100 Americans at random, you will find that 87 of those Americans actually eat tomatoes. So that's what percentages are. You're very familiar with that. And the last thing we're going to look at here today is correlation. Now, the term correlation is going to refer to the degree of relationship between two sets of data. For example, there's a high correlation between exercising regularly and living a long time. But correlation does not mean, however, that when two sets of data are correlated, there's necessarily a cause and effect relationship. For instance, a high correlation might exist between drinking mineral water and living a long time, but this does not prove that drinking mineral water causes a person to live a long time. So correlations are great, just make sure you use them correctly. And remember, this whole idea is that we need to support our evidence. You have your contentions, you have your points. Imagine it as the top of a table that's laying down on the floor. Again, you have to give support to what you're saying. Get that table up off the ground. Get that table up under with some legs. Put some legs under that table. Make sure it is supported well. And make sure you have enough supports. Just one leg on a table makes it extremely wobbly. Make sure you have enough support for that table, for your contention, for the point you're trying to make, to support it firmly. And when you do support it, you will find people will accept your contentions much easier.